Hello, and welcome to the first session of the prayer course. The aim of this course is to give some teaching about the vital spiritual discipline of prayer, which will hopefully fuel your discussion. My name is Johnny Hughes, and I'm here with Pete Gregg. Pete is a pastor who accidentally became the founder and leader of the 24/7 prayer movement, which is an international, interdenominational movement of prayer, mission and justice. Pete also heads up prayer for HDB in London, which is the home of Alpha International. All in all, he couldn't be better qualified to teach us about prayer. Well, Pete, this is the first session of the prayer course, and in this session we're going to be looking at adoration. But before we get into that, I wondered if you might give us a little bit of the vision for the prayer course.
The vision really is Jesus. The vision is to grow in relationship with him. And the way you grow in relationship with God is through prayer. It's the heart of Christianity. If I never talked to my wife, or never spent time with her, or never listened to her, then I wouldn't have much of a relationship with her, even though I'd have a marriage certificate. And in just the same way as we grow in prayer, we get to know God better. We come into his presence more and more. I think I used to think that prayer was just something that kind of got beamed down on super holy people, which is why I liked outsourcing it to others, because I found prayer so difficult. And the discovery I made was that actually prayer is something we can all get better at. We can all grow in it. And, you know, it's interesting to me that the one thing that the disciples ever really asked Jesus to teach them to do, because they realized this is the key to his rabbinic ministry, was to pray. This is Luke chapter 11, verses 1 and 2. One day Jesus was praying in a certain place. I find that mind-blowing in itself. Jesus, if anyone ever could have said, well, I don't really need to pray, it was Jesus. But he prayed more than almost anyone. One day Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray. And Jesus responded overwhelmingly to that request by giving them the Lord's Prayer. And so when we come to Jesus and say, look, we find this difficult, would you teach us to pray? The disciples went on to have incredible prayer lives. They prayed over handkerchiefs and people got healed. They prayed for the sick. They saw people raised from the dead. They prayed for their persecutors. They prayed and rooms shook. But it begins at a point in time for each one of us when we just say, I need help with this. And we all find it difficult. There's a lovely story about the great prayer warrior, Teresa of Avila. And she once confessed that sometimes in her hour of prayer, she'd shake the hourglass to make the time go quicker.
I think I've done that.
Yeah, because she, you know, sometimes prayer is difficult, but when we ask Jesus for help, he will.
So put very simply then, the aim of this course is to help people grow in their relationship with God.
Yeah. By the end of 6 weeks, you will be better at hearing God's voice. You'll be experiencing more of his presence. You will have processed some of your disappointments and struggles in prayers. And I think you'll even, I hope, be seeing more miracles because you'll be learning how to unlock the power of prayer.
Sounds great. I am in.
Brilliant.
So
it's good because it'd be lonely if
yeah,
if
it'd
you
be
were.
awkward, yeah. Well, why don't you give us some idea then about how the 6 sessions are going to break down?
When you say to people prayer, everyone seems to have a different idea of what it means, but really there's lots of ways of praying. It's a little bit like a toolbox, and different tools do different things. This is, I assume, for hitting things with. I'm just guessing. You know, if you were trying to chop something with this, it wouldn't work. And so we need to learn how to use the different types of prayer for different situations. So we're going to go through those, and we're going to use the Lord's Prayer as our kind of skeleton. And so, for example, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Well, we start with adoration. We'll look at that today. And then, your kingdom come, your will be done. That is intercession. And then, give us this day our daily bread. That's petition. That's also about listening to God, because his word is spiritual as well as physical. As deliver us from the evil one. That's spiritual warfare. So we're going to look at all sorts of different types of prayer. But as I say, today we're starting with adoration.
So help me out with that. I mean, I like worshipping as much as the next person. But when it comes to prayer, what I tend to be doing is asking for stuff.
Yes. Well, look, obviously, if you're in an aeroplane and it's hurtling towards the ground, you don't have to put on a Hillsong track and put on a Tim Hughes baseball cap before you can scream help. That would just be weird. But when we're talking about developing a disciplined prayer life, our own personal quiet times or church prayer meetings, it's a good idea to start with adoration. Because when Jesus gave the Lord's Prayer, he said we should start, "Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name." So he's saying that we start by recognizing God is God. He is holy. He is our Father who loves us, before we just sort of throw our shopping lists at him. After I finished writing one of the books that I wrote, the moment came when I could send the manuscript off. I've been looking forward to that for a while because I've been working insanely hard. I can only type with those two fingers. It's like a crazy woodpecker after too much caffeine. And I'd hardly seen my wife and kids for weeks. And so I called the children into the room with me and I said, "Children, it's time. Daddy's done it," and they sat on my lap. We said a little prayer. And then they pressed send and the manuscript went. And then we went to this restaurant near our house where there's a big leather sofa, a bit like this, bigger, and swings and slides for the kids. And so I sank exhausted into this sofa. And I said to the kids, "Go forth, use the swings and slides, verily." And one of them just charged out, swing, slides. And the other one went to the door and he stopped. And then he turned around and he looked at me. And he came back towards me slowly. And he said to me, "Daddy, I've missed you." Wow. And he just climbed into my lap and he wouldn't go. And you have no idea how that ministered to my tired father's heart. And I didn't love him more than the other one at that moment. He didn't have to do it. It wouldn't have been wrong for him to go on and use the slides and swings. But he took an opportunity to give his time and his emotions to minister to me. And that, I think, is adoration. It's saying, in prayer, we're not just trying to get something out of God, we actually can minister to the heart of the Father.
Wow. And I guess, like you say, you wouldn't have minded if you'd have just gone straight out with your other son to play on the swings.
No, not at all. In the early days of the 24/7 prayer movement, I think we thought if we just pray as hard as we are for a bit longer, we're going to kind of flick some big heavenly switch and revival will break out. And then God sent us a godly man called John Dawson who said a very simple thing. He said, "Everybody prays. The difference when Christians pray is that they are climbing into the lap of their heavenly Father." And prayer is about intimacy and presence. The Book of Common Prayer, which was written in 1662, says of adoration that it is the lifting of the heart and the mind to God, asking nothing but to enjoy God's presence. So prayer begins with asking nothing but to enjoy God's presence, and God's presence is enjoyable. Prayer is meant to be enjoyable. It's not sustainable if it's not enjoyable. C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Narnia Chronicles, he said, "In commanding us to glorify him, God is inviting us, get this, to enjoy him." I didn't marry Sammy as a child-raising strategy. Do you know what I mean? I married her because I loved her and I wanted to spend time with her. And the miraculous and messy byproduct of that intimacy is our kids. And in the same way, as we give ourselves to relationship with God, adoration, intimacy, presence, thanksgiving, there are miraculous and messy consequences we call answers to prayer, but it begins in relationship.
I love those analogies, but I guess I'm trying to figure out what it looks like in practice.
There was a moment where I remember it very clearly actually. I was walking down the street near my house and God spoke to me as clearly as I think he's ever spoken to me. It wasn't an audible voice, but it was so dramatic that I froze in the street. And what God said to me was, "Look at that tree." Right? So I like freeze and I'm staring at this tree like this is going to be my burning bush moment. The people in the street are thinking, "Weirdo," And I'm gazing at this tree and absolutely nothing happened. So after a bit, I said, "Okay, Lord, I am looking at the tree. What happens now?" And what I sensed God saying to me was, "Gee, you get so intense." I just thought it was a good tree. And so I find myself in the street saying, "Good job on the tree, Lord. Like, well done on the tree." Here's the deal. Your prayer life is at its best, not when you're praying the big prayers, but when you're praying the tiny prayers, the trivial prayers, the small prayers, where you're thanking God for trees. Or people say, "Should I pray for parking spaces?" And as far as I'm concerned, you should. The reason being that then, if you get a parking space, you're going to thank God for a parking space, which is brilliant. It drives the atheists crazy, right? And they say, "Well, would you have got the parking space if you haven't prayed?" I had no idea. That's heavyweight theology stuff. I just know if I pray for inevitable things like daily bread and the land where the supermarket's full of the stuff, then I'll get to thank God all the time. And there's one other thing on that, Johnny, which is this. The book of Genesis says that before there was any sin or sickness or suffering in the world, Adam and Eve walked and talked with God every day in the cool of the evening. And of course, one day there will be no more sin or sickness or suffering in the world, but we will still walk and talk with God. And I think for many of us, we wouldn't know what to talk to God about if there was no problems in the world, because all we ever talk to him about are things we need fixed. And actually, presumably Adam and Eve were just chatting about life, about, giraffes and elephants and whatever. And so I think we need to learn how to just talk with God about the trivia and about the things that are on our minds. And that is the heart of adoration.
So adoration then, it's more of an attitude really than a strategy to manipulate God into doing what we want him to do.
And yet here's the funny thing, that when we start with adoration, it contextualizes our prayer requests, our petitions in a really helpful way. Let me give an example. If you take a really sensible, simple prayer request, like, "Lord, help me at work today." Okay. There's actually two ways of praying that one prayer. You can either pray it from a place of worry and fear, whereby you're thinking there's never enough hours in the day, there's never enough money in the bank, my boss doesn't like me, I don't like my job, and so you go, "Please help me at work today, Lord." Or you can pray that same prayer, and I think if you've spent time in adoration, this is more the approach, where you think, "I may not like my job much, but actually I know God's put me there. And I know he's in control, and I know he's prepared good works in advance for me to do. And I know that it's the Father's glory that I bear much fruit. I know that he knows the plans he has for me, plans to prosper me and not to harm me, plans to give me hope in a future. And I know he loves me, and I know he makes all things work together for good." And so you come from this place of faith and hope and expectancy as you say, "Help me at work today." And if our prayers are just fueled by fear and problems, then there'll be a lack of faith in them. But when we come to our prayer requests with a sense of hope and a revelation of who God is, then there will be much more faith, much more expectancy, much more peace and trust in the way we bring our petition. So adoration is the context for appropriate petition.
Pete, can you tell us very practically what it looks like in your life to begin your prayer times in adoration? Maybe it's the scientist, the distant scientist in me. But I'm just trying to work out some kind of model or formula for this.
I'm just thrilled to hear that I didn't know that you were a scientist. When I come to pray, I do try to begin with adoration. And one of the things that helps me, I think, to structure my whole prayer times is actually often I will work through the Lord's Prayer, not just repeating it, but using it as a model. So each line becomes a springboard to think about God as Father and hallowing his name and what does it mean to pray for his kingdom to come. And sometimes I'll use that old acronym ACTS, adoration, confession, thanksgiving, supplication, which just means asking God for stuff. And it sort of holds me off from coming in with all my prayer requests until I've spent some time adoring and thanking God. Sometimes the Psalms will help me. Sometimes just putting on some worship music. If it's in a corporate prayer meeting, actually spending time worshipping before we move into praying for things can be really helpful. Johnny, a friend of mine told me a story just the other day which to me sums this whole message up about adoration. He's got a son who's I think 17 years old, and He's a pastor, this guy, and he said at the moment when his son gets home from school each day, he takes off his tie and he always comes and finds his dad, who's normally in his study, and his son just throws himself down on the sofa and just kind of sprawls out there, and he doesn't particularly want to ask his dad for anything. He just wants to be in his dad's presence for a while before he gets on. And my friend said it ministers so much to him. He loves so much that his son does that. Now, of course, later in the evening, he'll be saying, can I borrow the car keys? Or, Dad, can you give me a hand with this? There's a place for petition, but it's also important that we learn how just to come into the presence of God and to be still and to enjoy his presence in that way. When we spend that time consciously in God's presence, in a way, that is the one time in our day when we don't pray. We tend to think, if I spend half an hour there in the presence of God, that's it, done for the day, and then I can get on with my life. But what if the half hour, the hour we spend each day with the Bible and prayer and worship is the time we recenter on Jesus, so that we can live the other 23 hours of our day praying in real time, more conscious of his presence, praying almost as a reflex reaction when we're watching TV or while we're at work. Because that's the aim, ultimately, is not just to have times of prayer each day, but to become a 24/7 prayer room, a place that is continually encountering God and enjoying God's presence, practicing the presence of Jesus 24 hours a day and 7 days a week.
That's brilliant. Why don't we start by praying?
Good idea.
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Father, we thank you that we can enjoy your presence. We're sorry for the times that we just throw our shopping list at you without first coming before you. Thank you that you are Father and that you love us. Thank you that you make a space for us in your arms. Father, we pray that you would teach us the attitude of adoration. Lord, teach us to pray. Amen.